Once upon a time a hard life in Koma village. Koma village was nestled at the base of a series of rolling hills, surrounded by fields that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. It was a small, quiet place where the people lived simply, relying on the land and their crafts to make ends meet. In the heart of the village lived a young woman named Era, whose beauty and strength had earned her the admiration of many. Era, in her early 20s, was tall and graceful, with smooth brown skin that glowed in the sunlight and a crown of thick, curly hair often tied back with a simple cloth. Her dark eyes carried a spark of determination, a reflection of a spirit that refused to yield to the hardships of life. She had inherited her father's strong work ethic and her mother's creativity, traits that made her a pillar of support for her struggling family. Struggles at home. Era's father, Ojo, was a farmer who spent long days under the scorching sun, tending to their small plot of land. His once strong frame had grown thin and frail from years of back-breaking labor. Her mother, Sod, was a weaver known for her beautiful baskets, which she sold at the village market. Though skilled, her earnings barely covered the family's needs. Era often helped her parents after finishing her chores. She would carry water from the well, tend to the chickens, and accompany her mother to the market. Despite their tireless efforts, poverty clung to them like a shadow. Their home was a small mud brick house with a thatched roof, sparsely furnished with a few stools, a wooden table, and mats for sleeping. While Era admired her parents' resilience, she couldn't ignore the weight of their expectations. As the eldest daughter, it was her unspoken duty to marry well and bring fortune to the family. The villagers often reminded her of this. "You're a beautiful girl, Era," one of the elders said to her one day. "A good marriage could lift your family out of this hardship." Era would smile politely, but her heart would sink. She didn't want her life to be defined by marriage. She dreamed of leaving Koma village, of finding a job in the bustling towns she had only heard about in passing. She wanted more than survival, she wanted freedom, security, and a chance to shape her own destiny. A fateful mistake. One fateful market day, Era's path crossed with a man named Depo. He was a trader passing through the village, selling fine fabrics and trinkets that dazzled the eyes. Depo was charming, with a confident smile, smooth brown skin, and a deep voice that made every word he spoke sound important. He wore a brightly patterned tunic and carried himself with the ease of someone who had seen the world beyond Koma. Depo noticed Era at her mother's basket stall and struck up a conversation. His compliments made her blush, and his tales of life in the city filled her with wonder. He spoke of grand markets, paved streets, and opportunities that seemed endless. "You could thrive there, Era," he told her one evening as they sat by the river. "A girl like you doesn't belong in a place like this." Era knew better than to believe sweet words from a stranger, but Depo's attention made her feel seen in a way she never had before. She ignored the warnings of her heart and allowed herself to fall for him. Their brief romance was a whirlwind of secret meetings and stolen moments, each one filling her with a dangerous mix of hope and recklessness. But just as suddenly as he had appeared, Depo left. He promised to return, but Era knew deep down that he wouldn't. She was left with a broken heart and, weeks later, the realization that she was pregnant. The dilemma. Era's world seemed to shatter when she discovered her condition. She kept it a secret, fearing the judgment of the village and the disappointment of her parents. She knew the stigma of being an unwed mother would ruin her reputation and cast shame upon her family. Her nights were sleepless as she wrestled with what to do. Her parents had already sacrificed so much, and the thought of adding another burden to their lives was unbearable. She thought of running away, but she had no idea where she would go or how she would survive. Desperate for guidance, Era decided to visit Mama Aya, an elder woman known throughout the village for her wisdom and unconventional solutions. Mama Aya lived on the outskirts of the village in a small, weathered hut surrounded by herbs and charms. The villagers respected her, though her methods often sparked whispers of suspicion. When Era arrived, Mama Aya greeted her with a knowing look. The elder woman was tall and slender, her skin marked with wrinkles that spoke of a long and storied life. Her piercing eyes seemed to see straight into Era's soul. "What troubles you, child?" Mama Aya asked, her voice calm and steady. Era hesitated, then poured out her heart, confessing her fears and her secret. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke of her shame, her family's struggles, and her uncertainty about the future. Mama Aya listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Era finished, the elder woman nodded thoughtfully. "There is a way," Mama Aya said finally, her tone measured. "It will not be easy, but it may solve your problems." Era leaned closer, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "You can sell the child," Mama Aya said plainly. "There are couples in the towns who are desperate for children and willing to pay a fortune for a healthy baby." Era stared at her in shock. "Sell my child? How could I?" "Listen to me," Mama Aya interrupted, her voice firm. "This is not about abandoning your child. It is about giving them a future you cannot provide. And with the money, you could save your family." The words hung heavy in the air. Era felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. The idea was unthinkable, yet it ignited a flicker of hope. Could this be the answer to her prayers, or was it the beginning of a path she would regret forever? Mama Aya's gaze softened. "You don't have to decide now, child. But know this, every choice comes with a price." Era left the hut with her mind in turmoil. The weight of her dilemma pressed down on her as she walked back to the village. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. The shocking proposal. Mama Aya's offer. The next morning, Era sat at the edge of the village well, staring into the clear water as though it could provide her with answers. Her heart felt heavy with the weight of her secret, and her mind swirled with fear and uncertainty. The thought of what Mama Aya had suggested lingered in her mind, haunting her every moment. Later that afternoon, Era returned to Mama Aya's hut, seeking clarity. The elder woman greeted her with the same knowing look, as though she already knew what Era would ask. "Mama Aya," Era began hesitantly, her voice trembling, "how can you suggest something like selling my child? It feels unnatural." Mama Aya nodded slowly, her expression calm but firm. "I understand your hesitation, child. But let me ask you this, can you provide for the child on your own? Can you give them the life they deserve while also supporting your family?" Era's silence was her answer. "Sometimes," Mama Aya continued, "we must make sacrifices for the greater good. There are couples out there, wealthy couples, who would love and care for this child in ways you cannot. And with the payment, you could save your family from hardship. This is not abandonment, Era, it is an act of love and necessity." Era's stomach churned at the thought. She had envisioned herself raising the child, cradling them in her arms and teaching them to laugh and dream. But the reality of her situation was stark. She had no means to provide for a baby, and her family's struggles only worsened each day. Era's struggle. The days that followed were torturous for Era. She found herself torn between two impossible choices: keep the baby and endure a life of poverty and judgment, or sell the child and secure her family's future. Her nights were sleepless, filled with questions that had no easy answers. She imagined the look on her parents' faces if they discovered her secret, the shame it would bring to them and the whispers it would stir among the villagers. Yet, the thought of handing her baby to strangers filled her with guilt and sorrow. One evening, as Era sat outside her home under the fading light of the setting sun, her mother, Sod, joined her. "You've been quiet lately," Sod said softly, her hands busy weaving a small basket. "Is something troubling you?" Era forced a smile and shook her head. "I'm just tired, Mama." That's all. But Soda's sharp eyes studied her carefully. Remember, Era, you are the heart of this family. Whatever is weighing on you, don't let it break you. We'll find a way, as we always do. Her mother's words only deepened Era's conflict. Could she truly endure the burden of her secret, knowing it might destroy the family she loved so dearly? Decision made. Days turned into weeks, and Era's resolve wavered with every passing moment. The pressure of her circumstances finally reached a breaking point when her father, Ojo, fell ill. Without money for medicine, his condition worsened, and Era watched helplessly as her family struggled to care for him. One night, in the solitude of her room, Era stared at her hands, trembling with the weight of her decision. She thought of her unborn child and the future they might have. Then she thought of her father, her mother, and the life they deserved but couldn't achieve on their own. With tears streaming down her face, Era whispered to herself, "I'll do it. For them." The next morning, she returned to Mama Aya's hut, her heart heavy with the choice she had made. "I've decided," she said quietly. "I'll sell the child." Mama Aya nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and sadness. "You're making a wise choice, Era. It won't be easy, but it will change everything." Setting the terms. Mama Aya wasted no time arranging the deal. She contacted a wealthy family in the nearby town of Ioka, a couple who had long sought a child to call their own. They were willing to pay a handsome sum for a healthy baby, and they assured Mama Aya that the child would be raised with love and care. Era listened as Mama Aya explained the details, her chest tightening with every word. "They'll send a messenger when it's time," Mama Aya said. "You'll give birth here, in my hut. No one in the village needs to know." Era nodded numbly. She hadn't told her parents about her pregnancy, disguising her growing belly with loose clothes and avoiding questions with excuses. The guilt of her deception gnawed at her, but she convinced herself it was for the best. The deal was sealed with a handshake, and Mama Aya handed Era a small pouch of gold coins as an advance. "Use this wisely," she said. "It's just the beginning." Era clutched the pouch tightly, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. As she walked back to the village, the weight of her decision pressed down on her like a stone. She had chosen this path to save her family, but the cost of that choice was something she would carry forever. Wealth and secrets. The first sale. The time finally came for Era to give birth. Under the cover of night, she made her way to Mama Aya's hut, her heart heavy with dread and anticipation. The small hut, dimly lit by flickering oil lamps, smelled of herbs and incense. Mama Aya had prepared everything for the delivery, her calm demeanor masking the gravity of the situation. Era labored through the night, her cries muffled by the walls of the hut. As dawn broke, her son entered the world with a strong cry, filling the room with the sound of new life. Mama Aya wrapped the baby boy in a soft cloth and handed him to Era. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Era stared at the tiny face, his dark eyes blinking up at her. Her heart swelled with love and sorrow, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She traced his delicate fingers, memorizing every detail, knowing this would be her last moment with him. "You don't have to do this," Mama Aya said softly, sensing her hesitation. Era shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, I've made my choice. This is for him, too. He'll have a better life than I could ever give him." With trembling hands, she handed the baby to Mama Ireland. The midwife took him gently, her expression somber. Moments later, a messenger from the buyers arrived, taking the baby and leaving behind a heavy bag of gold coins. The door closed, and Era was left staring at the empty space where her child had been. Transformation. Era returned home with the gold hidden in a cloth bag. The weight of the coins felt like both a blessing and a curse. She used the money carefully, paying off her family's debts and purchasing new farming tools for her father. With what remained, she bought her mother colorful fabrics and filled their pantry with enough food to last months. Her parents were overjoyed. They assumed Era had found a well-paying job in the nearby town and marveled at her ability to bring such fortune to their household. "You've brought light back to this family, Era," her father said one evening, his eyes filled with pride. "You're a blessing to us." Era smiled, but the praise felt hollow. Deep down, she knew the truth of her actions, and it weighed heavily on her heart. Still, she convinced herself that it had all been worth it. Her family was happy, and their lives had improved. That was what mattered, wasn't it? With their newfound prosperity, Era began to stand out in the village. She wore brighter clothes made from finer fabrics and carried herself with a quiet confidence that turned heads. The villagers noticed her transformation, whispering about her success. "She's so lucky," one woman said. "She must be working for a rich family in the city. Or perhaps she's been blessed by the gods," another added. Era said nothing to correct their assumptions. She let them believe what they wanted, hiding her shame behind a facade of pride. Addicted to wealth. As the months passed, the memory of her son began to fade, replaced by the satisfaction of seeing her family thrive. But as the gold dwindled, so did her sense of security. Era realized that the wealth she had tasted was not enough, it was fleeting, and she craved more. She convinced herself that another sale would guarantee her family's future. If one child had brought so much change, surely another would cement their stability. This time, she approached Mama Aya with confidence, her heart no longer burdened by hesitation. "Mama," Era said, sitting in the elder woman's hut, "I want to do it again." Mama Aya looked at her sharply, her piercing eyes filled with concern. "Again? Era, do you understand what you're saying?" "I do," Era replied firmly. "I've thought it through. This is the best way to secure my family's future." Mama Aya sighed deeply and shook her head. "Era, listen to me. You've already paid a heavy price for that wealth, even if you don't see it yet. This path you're walking, it will consume you." But Era dismissed her warning. "This is what's best for my family, Mama. I've already made my decision." Mama Aya said no more, but her silence was heavy with disapproval. The second sale. Era sought out another brief romance, this time with a traveling merchant who stopped in Koma village to trade goods. Their encounter was short-lived, but it served its purpose. Months later, Era returned to Mama Aya's hut, her pregnancy carefully concealed from the village once again. When the child was born, a baby girl, Era felt none of the hesitation she had experienced the first time. She handed the baby over to Mama Aya without a second thought, her eyes focused on the bag of gold coins the buyers had sent. This time, the payment was even greater. Era used the money to expand her family's farm, hire laborers, and buy livestock. Her parents were amazed at her ability to bring such fortune, though they never asked too many questions. Era's mother, however, began to notice her daughter's absences and the subtle changes in her demeanor. "You're different, Era," Sot said one evening. "Are you sure everything is all right?" Era forced a smile. "Of course, Mama. Everything is better than ever." But deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. The weight of her choices lingered in the back of her mind, a quiet voice she tried to ignore. Mama Aya's warning. One day, after collecting her latest payment, Era visited Mama Aya to thank her for her help. The elder woman greeted her with a somber expression. "You've become wealthy, Era," Mama Aya said, "but at what cost?" "I've done what I had to do," Era replied, her tone defensive. "My family is thriving because of this." Mama Aya leaned forward, her voice low and grave. "Wealth born of sacrifice always comes with a price. You may not see it now, but greed will consume you if you let it. Take what you have and stop, before it's too late." Era's jaw tightened, and she stood to leave. "Thank you for your concern, Mama, but I know what I'm doing." As she walked out of the hut, Mama Aya's final words echoed in her mind. "Be careful, child. The road you've chosen is not as safe as you think." The rise and fall of trust. The second sale. Era's new wealth transformed her once simple life. She now walked through the village with an air of quiet confidence, her colorful dresses brighter, her jewelry more refined, her hands often carrying small gifts for her family. However, despite the admiration of her neighbors, Era felt the strain of maintaining her facade. She realized that her newfound lifestyle was costly, and the gold, though plentiful, was not infinite. Determined to ensure her family's long-term prosperity, Era made a decision she once would have considered unthinkable. She resolved to become pregnant again, this time not by chance, but by choice. She sought out a merchant who passed through the village regularly, a man whose smooth words and fleeting presence made him an ideal candidate. Their interactions were calculated, devoid of emotion, and Era soon found herself expecting another child. Months later, Era returned to Mama Aya's hut. The process had become disturbingly familiar, the quiet delivery, the swift exchange, and the bittersweet emptiness that followed. This time, the buyers, a wealthy couple from a distant city, were ecstatic to receive a baby boy. The payment they offered was larger than before, a heavy bag filled with gold coins and fine jewels. As Era held the money in her hands, she felt a rush of triumph. "This is my ticket to fortune," she thought. "No more worrying, no more struggling." But the voice of guilt lingered faintly at the back of her mind, even as she silenced it with dreams of a better future. Village admiration. Era's newfound prosperity was impossible to ignore. The improvements to her family's farm were striking: new fences, plump livestock, and a bountiful harvest that exceeded anyone's expectations. She paid off their debts in full and began investing in small luxuries, like beautifully woven mats for their home and a set of finely crafted cooking pots for her mother. The villagers, who had long known Era as a hardworking but impoverished young woman, were both awestruck and envious. "Have you seen Era's farm?" one villager whispered. "She must have found a very good job in the city." "She's so lucky," another said. "The gods must have blessed her." Era basked in the admiration but remained careful to avoid too many questions. When asked about her wealth, she would smile modestly and say, "Hard work pays off." The villagers accepted her vague answers, too enamored with her success to press further. Her parents, though overjoyed by their improved circumstances, began to notice changes in their daughter. Era's smiles were less frequent, her laughter quieter. She seemed preoccupied, often staring off into the distance as though lost in thought. Growing isolation. As Era's wealth grew, so did her sense of loneliness. Her days were filled with activities to maintain her family's newfound status, managing the farm, purchasing supplies, and making appearances at the market. But her nights were quiet and cold, haunted by the memories of the children she had given away. She missed the simplicity of her former life, the small moments of joy shared with her family. Now, even when surrounded by loved ones, she felt a growing chasm between herself and the people she cared about most. Her mother, Sod, began to notice the subtle changes in her behavior. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Sod turned to Era with a probing look. "You've done so much for us, my daughter," she said. "But tell me, how did you manage all this? What kind of work brings such fortune?" Era froze, her spoon hovering over her bowl of soup. She forced a smile. "I've been working hard, Mama. That's all." Sod didn't press further, but her expression remained skeptical. Deep down, she sensed there was more to the story, though she couldn't prove it. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it only grew with time. Rumors began. Era's frequent absences and subtle changes in appearance did not go unnoticed by the villagers. Whispers began to circulate, fueled by curiosity and envy. "Have you noticed how Era disappears for weeks at a time?" one woman said to her neighbor. "And she always comes back with new clothes or jewelry." "It's strange," the neighbor replied. "And her figure changes, too. She looks pregnant one moment, and the next, she's back to normal." The rumors spread like wildfire, each version of the story more dramatic than the last. Some speculated that Era had a wealthy lover in the city who showered her with gifts. Others whispered that she had struck a deal with the spirits of the forest, trading her soul for riches. Era tried to ignore the gossip, but the murmurs reached her ears nonetheless. At the market, she could feel the stares of other women, their eyes filled with a mix of admiration and suspicion. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their playful greetings tinged with curiosity. Despite her outward confidence, Era felt the walls closing in. The villagers' admiration, once a source of pride, now felt suffocating. Every glance, every question, every whisper seemed to chip away at the carefully constructed image she had built. The truth unravels. A buyer's return. The delicate facade Era had built began to crumble one fateful day when a well-dressed man arrived in Koma village, his expression dark and filled with frustration. He made his way to Mama Aya's hut, his stern voice carrying across the quiet village as he demanded answers. "I trusted you," the man shouted, slamming his hand on Mama Aya's wooden table. "The child you sold me is nothing like what was promised. He is weak and sickly, nothing like the healthy boy you described. I want compensation, or I'll make sure the truth comes out." Mama Aya remained calm, her weathered face betraying none of the fear that gripped her heart. "I told you the risks," she said in her steady tone. "A child is not a product to guarantee perfection." Their heated exchange was overheard by a group of villagers passing by. Though Mama Aya managed to calm the buyer and send him on his way, the whispers began almost immediately. "What child was he talking about?" one woman murmured. "Did you hear him say sold? What does Mama Aya have to do with selling children?" another added. The rumors spread rapidly, and Era's name was soon woven into the growing web of suspicion. Her sudden wealth, her mysterious absences, it all began to make sense to those who had been quietly watching her transformation. Family confrontation. That evening, Era returned home to find her parents waiting for her, their faces tense with worry and anger. Her mother, Sod, held a basket in her hands, twisting the reeds nervously as she spoke. "Era, we need to talk," her father, Ojo, said, his voice steady but firm. "There are rumors in the village. People are saying things about you, about children being sold." Era froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to steady her voice as she replied, "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous." Sod stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Era, please, if there's something you've been hiding, tell us now. We've always trusted you, but these rumors, they don't sound like lies." Era clenched her fist, fighting back the urge to break down. "Mama, Papa, I don't know what these people are saying, but it's not true. I've worked hard for this family, and I've done everything to make sure we're taken care of. Isn't that enough?" Her parents exchanged a troubled glance, unsure whether to believe her. "We want to trust you, Era," Ojo said quietly. "But if there's something you've done, it will come to light eventually." Era stormed out of the house, her chest tight with panic. She knew the rumors were spreading faster than she could contain them, and her family's trust in her was beginning to waver. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her secrets threatening to crush her. Public exposure. The final blow came a few days later when another buyer, a wealthy woman from the city, arrived in the village, her voice sharp with anger. She marched straight to the center of Koma village, where Era happened to be at the market. "You," the woman shouted, pointing at Era. "You sold me a child through that old midwife. And now you think you can hide here and pretend you're innocent. The villagers turned to look at Era, their faces filled with confusion and shock. Era tried to back away, but the woman followed her, her words loud enough for everyone to hear. This woman sold her own child for gold. And now she's living in luxury while that poor boy suffers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People whispered furiously, connecting the dots between the rumors, Mama Aya's visitor, and Era's sudden wealth. Before Era could respond, a man from the crowd stepped forward. Era, he said coldly, is this true? Have you been selling children? Era opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. The weight of their stares, the anger and betrayal in their eyes, left her paralyzed. Her silence was all the confirmation they needed. The villagers erupted in outrage, their voices rising in a chaotic mix of accusations and disbelief. You've disgraced this village, someone shouted. How could you do this, Era? We trusted you, another cried. The mob grew angrier, demanding answers and justice. Some shouted for her to leave the village, while others threatened to burn her home. Era's carefully constructed world had crumbled in an instant, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Consequences. Era fled to her home, locking the door behind her as the shouts of the villagers echoed outside. Her parents followed shortly after, their faces pale with shame and anger. Era, her mother said, her voice trembling, is it true? Did you sell your children? Tears streamed down Era's face as she nodded. I did it for us, Mama. For this family. I didn't know what else to do. Her father's voice was cold and unyielding. You sold your own flesh and blood for gold. Do you think that justifies anything? You've brought shame upon this family. We can't forgive this, Era, her mother added, her voice breaking. We can't stand by you after what you've done. With that, her parents turned and walked away, leaving Era alone to face the wrath of the villagers. Her once admiring neighbors now looked at her with disgust and fury, their voices growing louder as they demanded justice. That night, as she sat alone in her grand but empty house, Era finally understood the cost of her choices. Her wealth had brought her nothing but pain and isolation, and the family she had tried to save now wanted nothing to do with her. Her fortune had come at the ultimate price, and now, she had lost everything. A journey for redemption. Mama Aya's guidance. After days of isolation and relentless shame, Era found herself at the door of Mama Aya's hut once again. The elder woman, whose calm demeanor had once offered reassurance, now looked at Era with sorrow etched deeply into her face. I warned you, child, Mama Aya said as Era collapsed to her knees. I told you greed would lead you to ruin. Tears streamed down Era's face. I've lost everything, Mama. My family, the village. I have nothing left. Please, tell me how I can fix this. Mama Aya sighed deeply and motioned for Era to sit. From a worn leather pouch, she retrieved a tattered list, a piece of paper that held the names and addresses of the families who had purchased Era's children. These are the people who took your children, Mama Aya said, handing her the list. If you truly wish to atone, you must find them. Speak to them. Beg for their forgiveness and plead for the return of your children. Era stared at the paper, her hands trembling. What if they refuse, she whispered. Some will, Mama Aya replied. But this journey is not just for them, it is for you. If you wish to heal, you must face what you've done. The weight of the list felt heavy in Era's hands, but she knew it was her only chance for redemption. She thanked Mama Aya and left the hut, determined to set things right, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. The journey begins. The next morning, Era set out on foot, the tattered list clutched tightly in her hand. She carried only a small bag of essentials, a few coins, a blanket, and a piece of bread her neighbor had left outside her door in pity. Her grand house, once a symbol of her success, now stood abandoned and cold, a reminder of all she had lost. Her journey took her across rivers, through forests, and into bustling towns she had only dreamed of visiting before. At each stop, she approached the homes of the families on Mama Aya's list, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. Mixed results. The first house she visited belonged to a kind-looking couple with soft smiles. Era explained who she was, tears in her eyes as she begged to see her child. "We understand your pain," the woman said gently. "But this boy is our son now. We've loved him as our own since the day he came into our lives. We cannot give him back." Though devastated, Era thanked the couple for taking care of her son and left, her heart heavier than before. At the second home, Era was greeted by a harsh, angry man. "You sold this child to us, and now you want to take him back," he shouted. "Leave, or I'll call the authorities." Terrified, Era fled before she could say another word. It wasn't until the third visit that Era experienced a glimmer of hope. An elderly couple living in a modest home greeted her warmly and listened to her story with compassion. "We've always wondered about his birth mother," the woman said, wiping tears from her eyes. "We want what's best for him. If you're truly ready to take him back, we'll let him go." When Era saw her child, a bright-eyed boy with a mischievous smile, she fell to her knees, sobbing. She promised the couple she would cherish and care for him with all her heart. This bittersweet pattern repeated itself throughout her journey. Some families refused to part with the children, while others, moved by Era's remorse, allowed her to reclaim them. Each reunion brought both joy and heartbreak, as Era faced the consequences of her actions and the deep scars they had left behind. Lessons learned. As the miles stretched behind her, Era had plenty of time to reflect on her choices. She thought of the children she had given away, the love she had traded for gold, and the family she had hurt in the process. For the first time, she truly understood the value of what she had lost, not wealth or status, but the bonds of family and the simplicity of honest living. One night, as she camped under the stars with the children she had reclaimed, Era spoke to them softly. "I made terrible mistakes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life making it right. I will give you the love and care you deserve." The children, though too young to fully understand her words, huddled close to her, their warmth a small comfort against the chill of the night. For the first time in years, Era felt a flicker of peace. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken the first steps toward redemption. Each child she brought back was a piece of herself she was reclaiming, a reminder that it was never too late to change. Redemption and atonement. Homecoming. After months of arduous travel, Era returned to Koma village with the children she had managed to reclaim. The sight of her home, once a grand symbol of her ill-gotten wealth, now felt hollow and cold. Dust had settled over the luxurious furniture and fine decorations she had once taken pride in. It was a stark reminder of the emptiness her greed had brought. Era chose to abandon the house and moved with her children into a modest hut on the outskirts of the village. The small, clay-walled structure was humble, but it radiated warmth, a fresh start for a mother determined to atone for her past. Her neighbors watched her return with skepticism, their whispers a reminder of her tarnished reputation. "She's back," one woman murmured. "And with children. I wonder what she plans to do now." Though the stairs were heavy and the judgment clear, Era held her head high. She had accepted her past mistakes, and now, all that mattered was making things right. Rebuilding trust. The road to rebuilding trust in the village was slow and painful. Era dedicated herself to raising her children, pouring her love and energy into them to make up for the years they had lost. Each day, she worked tirelessly, mending clothes, cooking meals, and ensuring they felt the warmth of a mother's embrace. Her humility and hard work began to catch the attention of the villagers. They saw her carrying water from the well, teaching her children how to read, and tending a small garden to provide for them. The wealth that once defined her was gone, replaced by a quiet dignity. One day, an elder approached her while she was planting seeds in her garden. "Era," he said, his tone cautious, "you've been through much. But it seems you're trying to make amends." "I am," Era replied, her voice steady. "I can't change the past, but I can give my children a future. That's all I want now." Slowly but surely, the villagers began to soften. Some offered her seeds and tools, while others invited her to community gatherings. Though forgiveness was not immediate, Era's sincerity and persistence began to heal the rift she had created. A life of giving. As Era's reputation began to recover, she decided to use the last of her wealth to give back to the community. She sold the remains of her grand home and used the proceeds to build a small community center in the heart of Koma village. The center, made of simple clay bricks and a sturdy thatched roof, became a space where women and children could gather, learn, and grow. Era organized classes to teach young women skills like weaving, farming, and basic bookkeeping. She also offered counseling to those facing hardships, sharing her own story as a cautionary tale. "Greed can destroy everything," she would say. "But love and sacrifice can rebuild even the most broken lives." The community center became a beacon of hope in the village, a symbol of second chances. Mothers brought their children to play and learn, and women found support and solidarity within its walls. Era's name, once spoken with contempt, now carried a sense of respect. Final reflection. Years passed, and Era grew old. Her once vibrant hair turned silver, and the lines on her face told the story of a life filled with both sorrow and redemption. She sat most evenings under the shade of a large baobab tree near her home, watching her children, now grown, as they walked the land or played with their own children. Era's heart swelled with pride and peace. She had built a life of love and purpose, not through gold or riches, but through the bonds she had fought to restore. The children she had reclaimed were her greatest treasures, their laughter filling the quiet corners of her once lonely heart. The villagers often brought visitors to meet her, saying, "This is Era, a woman who lost everything to greed but found her way back through love and sacrifice. Her story is a lesson to us all." Era would smile humbly, her voice soft as she replied, "Mistakes are a part of life. What matters is what we do after them." In her final days, Era sat surrounded by her children and grandchildren, the family she had fought so hard to rebuild. As the sun set over Koma village, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Era closed her eyes with a heart full of gratitude and peace. Her story became a legend in Koma village, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the transformative power of redemption. And though Era was no longer there to tell it, her legacy lived on in the lives she touched and the lessons she taught at the end.